Hello and welcome back to another KCC video. I'm Rob, and today we'll be jumping into malicious compliance. Before we start, please hit that subscribe button and click the notification bell so you know when the next video goes live. Our first story today comes from Razor16251. Manager wants me to identify people every time I encounter someone at an alarm? Sure thing. Let's jump right in. So, a little story from years ago about an assistant manager that doesn't understand the work at all. I worked as a security guard, driving around industrial areas and responding to alarms that go off at the buildings from our clients. When I started there, I was told and learned to ask for proper ID, driving license, passport, ID card, if I encountered someone in the building, which was very common as most alarms came from people not turning off the alarm in time or entering the wrong code. And note their details in the report. But, and this will be important later on, if they can't show ID, kindly request them to leave and close the building. If they refuse, call the police to deal with it. Some background to make things clear. Laws here make it so that security guards are just civilians, which means I can ask for ID, but if they refuse to give it, there is nothing I can do. Only law enforcement officers can demand IDs. Also, my assistant manager hates me for some reason, always looking for something to pin on me. So for a few years, I do this as I was learned. Ask for ID if I found someone in the building and ask them to leave if they refused or didn't have one with them. Some would show credit cards or other things with their name on it, then I would write it in my report but still ask them to leave. All this time, the assistant manager would go over these reports in the morning, but I never heard any complaint about it. So I was doing stuff right, I thought. After a few years, on this particular day, I get an alarm. So I drove there. I arrive at the building, go in, and find the cleaning lady doing her job. The alarm system log shows she entered the wrong code the first time and was just a little too late entering it correct the second time, as would happen a lot. I kindly ask her for an ID, and she tells me she doesn't have any with her. She shows me a bank card with her name. I write down the name in the report, including that it was from a bank card, and tell her she has to leave. She understands, picks up her stuff, and leaves. I finish my report and go on my merry way. The next morning, I receive an email from my assistant manager going mental over the fact I sent the cleaning lady away without noting down proper ID details, and telling me the client is mad because they wanted to know who was in the building. I calmly replied that I did what I always did and was instructed to do when I joined the company, and had been doing without any issue for the last 3 or 4 years. The reply came fast with detailed instructions. If someone doesn't have proper ID on them, you call the police and have them identify the person so you can note it in your report. The assistant manager also made a memo stating this to everyone in the unit, which I of course also made a copy of. As the good employee that I am, I followed that instruction to the letter. Most others didn't, as they weren't targeted by the assistant manager, so they could do whatever they wanted. I called the police every time a person couldn't show me proper ID, which happened almost every shift I worked, if not multiple times in a single shift, leading to 1. A few employees of clients actually being arrested for failing to identify to a law enforcement officer. This wasn't my intention at all. Some police officers were jerks and just arrested them, even though they could verify the identity of someone fairly simple on location. 2. The police calling my manager. Why the hell were they called every single day to go and confirm someone's name because they didn't have ID on them? 3. Multiple clients calling the manager why a simple alarm was taking 3 times longer than usual. Clients have to pay per 15 minutes I am on site after the initial 15 minutes have passed, and refusing to pay the extra fee for me waiting for the police to show up. As I expected, I got invited for a talk with my manager and assistant manager to discuss some things. Basically, my manager wanted to chew me out over all these calls he had been getting, let alone people being arrested. The next day, I sit down with my manager and the assistant manager, being very cheerful as his favorite target was getting a huge reprimand. The manager asks me why I called the police every time someone doesn't have a proper ID, asking me if I have any idea how pissed off the police is and how many clients are refusing to pay the fee because it takes so much longer now that I have to wait for the police. Basically, I cost the company a lot of money. After the manager has asked these questions, I pull out my folder containing the email conversation with the assistant manager, instructing me to do exactly that, and the copy of the now conveniently disappeared from the office memo with the same instructions, both signed by the assistant manager. The same assistant manager that is now turning pale, realizing what I'm about to hand over to the manager. I calmly explain to the manager, while he is reading both papers, that I am only following the instructions given to me, as I had clearly been doing it wrong for the last 3 to 4 years prior to this incident. The face of the manager is slowly turning red from anger, while the assistant manager is turning paler by the second. Before the manager explodes, he asks me to go grab a coffee and wait till he calls me back in. They needed to go over these papers and decide what they would do with me. Sure thing, boss. While I'm enjoying my coffee, I can hear my manager go mental to his assistant. Multiple things like, "How can you be so stupid?" and "They have it on effing paper, you idiot," are clearly heard across the entire floor. When I get called back in, I can see my assistant manager sitting silently, shamefully, behind his computer, attempting to avoid any and all eye contact with me. The manager calmly explains he wasn't aware of these papers and that I should follow the instructions as all other employees should, saving face as admitting this was wrong and changing the instructions would mean defeat of the management, and that he would inform all clients about this so they can avoid these kinds of incidents. I spend the next 9 years following these instructions, which angered the assistant manager as he would read my reports every morning, telling about how the police had to show up again and again for something silly. Eventually, they found a way to get rid of me, reassigning me to a new position, which I gladly accepted, as the work was a lot more fun. I actually became a law enforcement officer with that switch. The pay was better, and the hours were even sweeter. Have to admit, I'm kinda disappointed. I was hoping that the assistant manager would show up at night and not have their ID on them. Speaking of ID, how many people actually walk around without any ID on them? I mean, don't you need a license to drive a car these days? That's something that always got me when I worked at the convenience store and somebody came in looking for cigarettes. "Oh, I'm sorry, do you have ID on you?" "Oh, you don't? Well, you're driving your car. What would you say to the police when they ask you for it?" Our second story today comes to us from Lunatic976. "I need your long essay on a single page." Yes, ma'am. Let's jump right in. When I was a college sophomore, we had this professor, Mrs. Wang, in religion studies who would act like her subject should be our top priority. Although we came from different majors, religion studies is just a filler subject needed for students in this Catholic college. She wanted us to come every meeting because attendance is part of her grade, which was fine by me, but she would give us too many research assignments for so little time. This class is a Tuesday to Thursday one, so if she gives us 3 research assignments on Tuesday, the outputs are expected to be submitted on Thursday same week. This started a problem on all of us since we also have a lot of things to do from major subjects, but it would be a hassle to fail a subject like this. Retaking a major subject is acceptable, retaking a filler subject is annoying. One Tuesday she gave us an assignment, a 4,000-word essay to be submitted on Thursday. 4,000 is a lot for us given the time frame, and that week was the week before midterms, so it gave us a hard time. But the catch, she wanted it on a single sheet of short bond paper, which is literally impossible to fit the 4,000-word essay. A classmate of mine, Nathan, asked Mrs. Wang about the single page thing. Nathan asked if we could submit multiple pages of the essay to accommodate the 4,000-word essay she was asking us. You are all stubborn. 4,000-word essay in a single page. That simple. Mrs. Wang was already in her early 60s at that time, so I don't think she had an idea of what a compressed 4,000 words in a single page would look like when printed. In every subject, we have a Facebook group for announcements, discussions between classmates, and note sharing. In some subjects, the teacher was usually the admin of the group, but since Mrs. Wang is not too fond of Facebook, one of our classmates volunteered to create a group for us. The night before the submission, we were having a problem with our outputs. Some classmates who were done with the essay tried to print their outputs. The font was too small, even though the margin was already adjusted. Here comes the malicious compliance. Nathan, who was still a little pissed about the whole situation, posted a status on our group. Let's give her what she wants. 4,000 words in a single page. The comments were blowing up. Some commented they were thinking of the same, and others were laughing. That time, the ha 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 reaction button wasn't still a thing, so literal ha 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 were filling up on the comments. The next day, we were all excited about our plan. One by one, we placed our papers on her table. As she was scanning on some papers, she went ballistic. "Why are the words in these too small?" Nathan raised his hand. "Ma'am, you were clear about a 4,000-word essay on a single page. That's what it looks like." Mrs. Wang couldn't contain her anger. She realized she was wrong. Instead of apologizing, she just told us to reprint our outputs and submit them on Tuesday next week. We all agreed. I mean, all you did here was really follow directions. It's up to the teacher whether they have a microscope to read it or not. Our final story today comes to us from Blackfire Phoenix. Clean enough, nosy Aunt Rosie. Let's jump right in. Okay, so I originally thought to put this in the petty revenge sub, but I think it fits a bit better here. For a bit of background, my parents are a bit older than most parents are when having a child. I was adopted at the age of 5 weeks, and at that time, my dad was 42 and my mom was 37. This is important to note because my dad is the youngest child in his family, and his youngest sister, he was the only boy out of 4 kids, was 16 when he was born. So that being said, my aunts are all very old now, and they aren't the friendly old lady type, sadly. They've always been greedy, nosy, and love to gossip and spread rumors about the in-laws of the family. My mom has gone through a lot of torture because of them, which is the case with this story. And now, so have my husband and I. 2 of the 3 have gotten nicer over the past couple of years, but the middle sister, who is in her 80s now I believe, has always been the worst and continues to be to this day. This story is about her. I'll call her Rosie, though I honestly don't care that much if she were to find out I wrote this. Still, I'd rather not risk that for my dad's sake, cause he'd never hear the end of it. I have many other stories about my 3 aunts, but this one came to mind recently. Aunt Rosie has lived right next door to my parents all of my life, and to convey how nosy and how much of a bitch she is, I'll give a few examples of the outrageous things she's done in the past before I start the story of one of my many petty revenges against her. Rosie has, on multiple occasions, crept up to our kitchen window to peek in. Since that window is higher up due to the sink below it, she has always gone to that one, since it'd be harder for anyone to notice her peering in from below, unless they were using the sink. More times than I can count, she's scared the hell out of me while I was washing dishes. She's too old to do this now, but she would creep up and I'd usually catch her movement in my peripheral. I've broken a few dishes due to her window jump scares. Still, she topped that level of privacy invasion several times. Unbelievably, during a hurricane one year, she was so intent about seeing how badly my mom's flowers were damaged, she loves to rub that kind of thing in my mom's face just to get her upset, that she walked to our house and stood outside in the downpour and high winds. If I hadn't noticed her and my dad hadn't gone out to make her come inside, she would have been crushed by a pecan tree. Not 5 minutes after she came in, it fell across the spot she had been standing and onto our roof. Crazy, right? Well, instead of being shaken up by the fact that she came so close to death by tree, she was just amused and rubbed in the fact that our sunroom roof was effed, as well as bringing up my mom's ruined flowers. There are so many stories like that, but this should be enough to convey what kind of person she is. Anyway, on to the story. Rosie is obsessive about cleanliness as well, and our house was usually a bit messy when growing up. My dad worked long shifts, my mom had been diagnosed with MS, and had battled cancer for 3 years on top of that, and though I did chores, I could only do so much more whilst going to school. Of course, Rosie would take any chance she could to come in and point out any mess, sometimes just letting herself in when she thought no one was home so she could later rub it in. She'd often insist on helping out just so she could go gossip to my dad's other sisters about how worthless my disabled mom was, or talk about how lazy of a daughter I was. Unlike the other nieces and nephews in the family, she loves to speak poorly of me because I was adopted, and now because I'm the black sheep of the family. I'm a Wiccan and a nerd who doesn't conform to the preppy, snobbish behavior that the rest of my cousins have. So one day she came over and actually rang the doorbell instead of just waltzing in, and I answered the back door. At the time, I was probably 13 or 14 years old. She had brought us some home-cooked food, as she did quite a bit. This seems like a sweet gesture, but in reality, she usually do it so that she could brag about what a good Christian she was and how she helped such a poor family. My dad has always tried to stay on good terms with her though, so I had been instructed to accept the food at the door while my mom napped and my dad was at work. It's important to note that my mom had just been diagnosed with MS a month or so before this incident. I made a bit of an awkward small talk with Rosie and then was saying goodbye when she caught the door and stuck her head into our back porch. Just to clarify, it's a closed-in porch. I was already angry with her that day, as it had come around to us earlier in the week that she had been telling people that my dad should just leave my mom because of her decline in health. So I felt my blood boil as I watched her silently survey the entire room with a look of disgust. She didn't speak for around a minute, just stood there staring at everything. Finally, she pulled her head back and looked at me. In the most condescending and disgustingly sweet voice she could muster, she said, "Blackfire, how about you clean this porch today?" Now, I admit, the back porch was always the messiest room in the house. The far side of the room was cluttered with boxes that we didn't have proper storage space for. We would temporarily put trash bags by the door, and there was always quite a bit of dirt that constantly got tracked in from the garden several times a day. This particular day, we hadn't cleaned up the porch for about a couple weeks, so it was worse than usual. Even still, I did not want her sticking her nose in our business and bossing me around in my own home, especially since I was helping take care of my mom too. I had a lot on my plate. It was on a Saturday, and I just wanted to relax, and cleaning would have been the farthest thing from relaxation. I was stressed out and I wanted a day to just be a kid. I tried to smile and said, "Oh, don't worry, Aunt Rosie, I'll clean this up tomorrow." It wasn't a lie. I had already planned to clean the porch the next day, but I desperately wanted some time to myself to unwind before tackling the mess. Of course, she refused to listen to me. "Oh, but wouldn't your dad feel so nice coming home tonight and seeing how clean it will be? Having to help your mama takes quite a toll on him with the amount of work he already does. It's not easy on him having a crippled wife, so it's your responsibility now to do most of the cleaning, right?" She attempted to sound solemn as she spoke like that about my mother too. Now she had pissed me off more. She knew how sensitive of a subject my mom's condition was, and she knew how badly I wished to make my dad happier with everything he had been taking on. And knowing that she had been telling everyone that my dad was suffering having to deal with my mom, and that he should leave her, it was difficult to hold my temper and force myself to be polite. I somehow managed to calmly say, "No, it's not easy on any of us, as you so well know." With the way I said this, I made it clear to her that I knew what she'd been saying behind our backs. "You're very right. It is my responsibility. I'll clean this up today then." Her expression briefly changed at my implication that I knew of her nasty gossip, but she continued on as if I hadn't called her out. She sticks her head in again and tuts at the mess. "Oh no, this would take you several hours to properly clean on your own. How about I help later today? It'd be no trouble. This just must be cleaned up today." Now, I could barely endure a 5-minute conversation with the woman, much less a couple of hours. Again, I told her that I'd handle it myself, but it was obvious that she wasn't going to back off, as she kept going on about everything that needed to be done. So I finally agreed, though I had already decided that she wasn't going to win this. She'd only go talk shit to the rest of the family if I actually had her help. And I knew that I would definitely snap if I had to be around her and her passive-aggressive comments about my mom for that long. She gave me a large, satisfied grin and told me she'd be back in 3 hours to help me. If she was so troubled by the mess in my house and wanted me to make it spotless ASAP, I'd happily do it right away without her. After all, she said it was my responsibility after all. This is so bizarre, I know, but I knew that if she were to come back and find I had already cleaned the porch without her now, she'd be furious. She wouldn't get to rub anything in. She'd be unable to hold it over our heads, and in her eyes, she'd have lost at her own petty game. I would be getting her back in a weird way for the things she had said about my parents. She was not going to screw with us over an untidy old porch. Before her insistence to help me, she had only said that I should tidy up, so I chose to comply with her original demand. As I type this out, I'm realizing more and more how ridiculous this was, but she's crazy as hell, and this really is something that she would be pissed about. So, as soon as the hag started her walk back home, I jumped into action, letting my anger fuel me. My mom stopped me for a moment as I passed by her lying on the couch. She asked me what was going on, and I explained the situation to her. She was pissed that Rosie was, yet again, sticking her nose where it didn't belong. My mom had been so upset by Aunt Rosie's gossip, and I knew she did not want to see her, but I asked her if she could possibly answer the door when Rosie came back. My mom hesitated, but finally nodded, saying she would like to see the look on the old bitch's face. So for the next 2 hours, I cleaned as fast as I possibly could, making sure not to leave a spot of dust or dirt. I was already worn out that day from helping my mom out so much after school each day. I was straining myself from running around so much when I finally finished, but I didn't care. I had been scared that Rosie would show up before I was done, so I was just smug that I had beat her. Now I just had to wait. Right on time, Rosie rings the doorbell an hour later. There's a little set of windows looking out onto the porch from the kitchen, so I quickly hid by them so I could discreetly peek out at her at an angle where she wouldn't be able to see me. My mom took a deep breath to calm her nerves, grabbed her cane, and went to answer the door. I had told her what to say ahead of time if she was asked where I was. The conversation went something like this. "Hello, Rosie. What brings you back by today?" Rosie is silent for a long while, and I take a peek out to see her leaning forward into the porch. Her mouth is agape, and she's looking the entire room over with angry, wide eyes. She has a very distinct tone to her voice when she's pissed, and she couldn't hide it when she finally responded. I ducked back down and just listened. "Well, Backfire and I were supposed to clean this porch up together today," in a very innocent voice. "Oh, well, she seems to have done it already." "I can see that," irritated sigh. "I offered my help, but I guess my help isn't wanted. I'm sorry you feel that way. I think she wanted to just get it done quickly since it's Saturday and she has plans later. I had no such plans. And you did tell her that she should do it today, right? It was her responsibility, right?" Rosie stutters a bit. "Well, yes, but then I told her I'd be back over to help out. She said nothing to me about having plans. I walked all the way back over here to help." "I'm sorry, Rosie, but she did say she could do it on her own, didn't she?" "Yes, but I thought y'all would appreciate my help. I thought she would appreciate my help. Where's she at now, huh? I'd like to speak to her." "She's taking a shower right now. She was going to help me clean this up tomorrow anyway, but since you insisted she do it today, I guess she just did as you told her to. She's old enough now to do this on her own anyway, but we do all appreciate everything that you do for us, Rosie." "Well, yes, but Oh, and thank you for the food earlier, by the way." "Oh, yes, you're welcome." In an overly exhausted voice, cuts Rosie off. "I'm so sorry, but I need to go sit down because I'm crippled, as you know. But thank you for your offer. We appreciate the thoughtfulness. Have a good day, Rosie." Rosie began to say something, but then quickly realized that my mom was closing the door on her, so she muttered a strained, "You too," and the door closed in her face. My mom came back in, and we quietly stood there until we could see Rosie stomping home in a huff. And then we looked at each other and burst out laughing. I know this is a very strange malicious compliance and petty revenge, but with someone like Rosie, it really ruffled her feathers. She told my dad later that she was disappointed in me, which only made me laugh more. She didn't come back over for about a month, which was an even bigger bonus for us. It felt so good to stand up to her like that, even though it wasn't direct, and it cheered my mom up too. "OP, you know you don't have to keep toxic people like that in your life, right? Even if they're family?" I think you need to have a serious talk with your parents about just how much of a role your aunt plays in the rest of your life. Thank you to all 3 OPs for posting in the Malicious Compliance subreddit. They are linked in the description below. Please go and check them out. Check out one of these other videos, and if you haven't yet, please hit that subscribe button for more daily Reddit stories.